Coming up on Theater Talk.
When Kurt Weill went to Hollywood in the 1930s to try to get some extra money too, he had just come to America, and Walter Wanger, a very powerful producer, said to Weill, "Your music is distinguished. I don't want distinguished music."
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. And we are joined tonight by our good friend, the historian and writer, Ethan Mordden, who's out with... what number book is this for you?
I lost count a long time ago.
You've written more books than Shakespeare wrote plays, I believe.
Well, all I know is you're a shelf in my house. You're a whole
Absolutely.
shelf.
The Ethan Mordden shelf.
I always wanted to be a shelf.
You're a
You
shelf.
are.
Well, Ethan's latest book is When Broadway Went to Hollywood, a history of the Broadway musical and its influence on Hollywood. And Hollywood then sort of transformed the Broadway musical in many ways.
Yes, it works both ways.
Although, what is the thesis of this book, to use a highfalutin word?
The thesis basically is that it seemed like a great idea for people from Broadway, let's say Richard Rodgers, Cole Porter, Lawrence Hardin, the Gershwins and so on, to move to Hollywood, at least temporarily, and do work there because, first of all, they'd get a national audience.
Right.
Broadway was somewhat national, but not the way Hollywood was, not the way the movies were. Plus, the money was insanely bigger in Hollywood. I don't know why. If you go back to early Hollywood, and I guess it's Mary Pickford who says, "Now I want a little more," to Uncle Adolph Zukor. "Now I want a little more. Now I want this." Finally, he basically wanted to pay her money not to make films for other people. She became too expensive to employ, and that's when she became her own producer.
Okay.
So the Broadway songwriters, even if you're successful in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, you are not making the money that you would think they are making.
Well, we have all these incredibly affluent theater people here always grumbling about how the money is so much less than it is in TV and movies now.
Yes, it's always been that way because Hollywood was always bigger, and it kept on. I'll give you an example. Irving Berlin was going to write the score to the Stair Rogers movie, Top Hat. At RKO, you had a rare producer named Pan Berman who loved Broadway songwriters. He wanted to work with all the greats, Jerome Kern, the Gershwins, Vincent Youmans, Irving Berlin. And it's going to be, what, 5 songs. He'll probably write 7 or 8, and they'll end up using 5. And Berlin, this is 1935, the height of the Depression. 35 was the worst year in the arts in America. There were 10 new musicals that went up on Broadway in the year 1935. At the end of the 20s, there were like 60 musicals every year. So, meanwhile, and Berlin is doing okay, and he's his own music publisher, so he's got that extra thing going on. And he says to Pan Berman, "I would like $100,000. This is the kind of money we're talking about. You don't get $100,000 for writing a full score on Broadway in 1935.
5 songs.
But 5 songs. And Pan says, "We can't go that high. 75,000 is the highest we can go." And Berlin doesn't like it. And Pan says, "All right, let's compromise. If Top Hat grosses, I forget what it is now exactly. I think it's something like 300,000 and change. You'll get 10% of the gross, not the net, the gross." Berlin thinks, because he's a good businessman, no movie musical has ever grossed anything like that. I'll never see a dime of this offer. But okay, he might as well write it, because he can write songs very easily, and he can come up with 5 great songs. They go ahead, and the movie comes out, and it's a big hit, and it grosses $3 million.
Oh my God.
So for 5 songs, he gets $300,000.
Wow.
You would not get that for writing 10 musicals on Broadway in those days.
Right.
In those days. Although it is true that certain hit songs, like Cole Porter's big one was Night and Day. That is until Don't Fence Me In. That's his biggest hit ever. But in the 1930s, let's say, yes, and no one knows that he wrote that because it's a cowboy song, but it is by Cole Porter. But from Gay Divorce, Night and Day was a phenomenal hit. It went around the world. And I believe his heirs are still dining out on, literally dining out on the royalties from that one song. But you mostly don't get hits that are that phenomenally big. So it was the money kind of thing. And ultimately, it didn't work out. The money was great, but they kept coming back from Hollywood because they had a terrible time.
Well, you said they derive from antagonistically different sources.
Yes.
Hollywood and Broadway.
Absolutely. Because movie musicals to people in Hollywood are movies. They're not musicals, they're movies. So that when they're making a movie of Annie, the famous, kiddie musical on Broadway, big hit, they let John Huston, that fabulous master of the musical arts, direct it. Or even Chorus Line, Richard Attenborough. They always think they're movies.
Yeah.
And they don't work the way, I keep pointing, that's Hollywood, this is New York.
West Coast, East Coast.
Broadway. The fact is, the movie musical, like other movies, came out of the early years of the silent film and developed, and the silent film finally became, with Birth of a Nation, something the middle class could attend, because before that the audience was riff-raff and sailors, this kind of thing. But the stage musical is much more historically grounded back to, the Black Crook and so on in the 1860s, 1870s. It has a completely different derivation. The people who are doing stage musicals are always thinking in musical terms, dancing and people who sing and dance. Movie musicals, it's totally different. For instance, you can have leads in a movie musical who have to be dubbed because they can't sing.
Yeah.
That really couldn't happen. I mean, yes, you have Rex Harrison and other novelty stars, like in My Fair Lady, that kind of talk their way
But
through.
he could enunciate beautifully.
He could, and not only that, at a certain point, you have to sing I've Grown Accustomed to Her Face, and then you're going to have to sing.
Is it also a question, though, Ethan, that the Broadway composers had more control in New York on Broadway?
Absolutely.
In Hollywood, it was run by the studio system, by the despots who ran the studio, and they
Indeed.
didn't much care what George Gershwin wanted or fought for.
Not only that, they sort of had contempt for them. And they were angry because they had to use them because these were the big names. Also, they didn't want that wonderful, innovative, imaginative touch that people like Porter or the Gershwins could bring to a song. When Kurt Weill went to Hollywood in the 1930s to try to get some extra money too, he had just come to America, and Walter Wanger, a very powerful producer, said to Weill, "Your music is distinguished. I don't want distinguished music." What he wanted was what Milton Berle called lappy. When Milton Berle would be talking to his, this is early TV, of course, big famous comedy variety show, and it's the reason why everyone bought a TV in like 1951 was to see Milton Berle. And finally, your neighbors have their own TV. You don't have to host them every whatever it was, Texaco, Saturday night. And he would say to his writers, the jokes aren't lappy enough. Lappy meaning they're so obvious they fall into the audience's lap. And those are the kind of songs that Hollywood likes. Plus, Hollywood, right from the beginning in the movie musical in 1929, was always afraid that if, let's say, boy and girl are walking in a forest glade, and he says, "I love you," and she says, "You do?" Now, in a show, the boys in the orchestra put down their racing forms and they start the introductory, and he sings a love you song to her. Well, if they're in a forest glade in the movie, the producers think, where's the orchestra? Has he hired a band to follow them around to sing, so that to accompany him when he wants to sing to the girl? Hollywood has always had that problem. They're afraid that the audience will think, where is the orchestra? They're in a forest or they're in a living room. They love backstagers for that reason.
Right.
Which kind of hems you in because it means you won't get character songs, which are the glory of the American stage musical. That's where somebody turns to the audience and sings, "Wouldn't It Be Loverly?" She just tears her heart open and shows you the person that she is, and you fall in love with the music. And because you do, you fall in love with her.
Who was the first Broadway composer to go Hollywood?
Well, I would say Irving Berlin, simply because I say the first musical is The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson, even though it was mostly silent.
Yeah.
There's that great scene where he finally returns home and there's his mother and he's entertaining her at the piano. So we don't have to worry about the orchestra because he's playing away, although it was dubbed.
Yeah.
And he sings Blue Skies. Now, Blue Skies had already been introduced on Broadway in a Rodgers and Hart musical, but it was interpolated.
Right.
It was a Ziegfeld show, and the score wasn't going over, and so they used Blue Skies, and this is the moment where sound film simply takes control of the business. Because if you see it, you might say it's corny, it's hokum, and the poor mother, because there's only one mic, and it's hanging over Jolson, so she gets to say,
She gets to cry.
Skies,
exactly.
smiling at
Singing
me.
away. But if you see that scene, I guess it's probably on YouTube if you want to check.
I gotta
It
check.
is so electric. Because I don't even like Jolson, I have to say. I think he's terribly overrated. And he's strange looking and he's strange acting and he's full of himself and I hate the sound of his voice. But he was electric as a talent. The screen goes wide when he does this song.
I want to interject that the wonderful thing about your book, besides reading it, is I sit there with my phone and you mention these musicals
You have to
and
check.
they're on these scenes, and then Jimmy Stewart in one of his early roles is a singing sailor.
Yes.
And so you go through the book and you can illustrate it for yourself.
Yes, that's the great thing about
yeah.
YouTube has really revolutionized our understanding of the arts.
Yes.
It's amazing what's on that.
No, but we have to say, though, there came a certain point, though, where Hollywood started making first-rate musicals, stuff that we would consider classics today, My Fair Lady. When does that begin? When does Hollywood get the hang of making a Hollywood musical?
I would just say the first movie musical, which is the Broadway Melody in 1929, even though it's crazy and bizarre and it's got all these mistakes in it, I mean, some of it is very sharp and very well observed, and a lot of the music is a little crazy. But for instance, there's a scene where one of these rich guys has designs on the soubrette, let's call her, and they're all at a party and she's sitting next to him and he is all over her in the worst way. It is one of the most maddening scenes in film. He's just pushing his face next and he's grinning at her like the wolf at the lamb. She's obviously uncomfortable, and I keep thinking, do you think she likes that? Is that, you think you're going to get a date that way? Of course, he's got money. So
Well, that's the history of the world.
yes, but that's what I mean. In other
That's
words,
why
this
it's a great
silly
movie.
musical is being honest about something
Yes.
that we're still trying to get used to today. But at the same time, it's got that, there's the marvelous scene in which all those backstagers tended to open in those days. This is 29 again. The Broadway Melody, MGM. In a music publisher's office, Tin Pan Alley.
Yeah.
And that's where the songs are tried out. And there's this wonderful scene where the guy is trying out his new song and everyone is coming in from the other rooms, the violin quartet and the dance group and the something and the something, and they're all revving to this fabulous, he's singing the title song, of course.
A million lights, they flicker there. A million hearts beat quicker there. No skies are made on the great wide way. That's the Broadway Melody. Hot dog.
It really is infectious. You can see why they all think this is the next big hit. And then later, for a reprise, he's with the two girls. They're sisters. And the smart sister loves him, and the pretty sister is loved by him. Smart sister has to sacrifice for the... And he sings the song. I think he's got a ukulele. And you're thinking, okay, there's no orchestra. It's just a ukulele because you're just in someone's living room. And then suddenly the orchestra jumps in and he says, hey, kids, let's go into our dance. And you're thinking, that is the silliest thing on earth. But then the end of the movie is not a kiss panel, as we used to put it when I was in romance comic books. It's the nice sister, to forget the fact that she had to give up her man, has gone off on a vaudeville tour. And she's in, I think, a taxi cab. You can't tell from looking at it where she is. She's with her performing partner and the agent. And the agent is one of those old-fashioned guys that keeps stuttering. He's trying to say, and then he gives you a synonym. And that's supposed to be very funny. That was a typical gag of the day. And he does that, and the partner laughs. And then we see this poor, self-sacrificing older sister. This look on her face is like, it's so completely inconclusive, and that's the end of the movie.
But it's what I think I saw that when I was 12, and I remember that. It's such a remember that.
And remember the mad
remember
scene?
the ending.
Her mad scene
Yeah.
at the dressing room
Yeah.
goes completely to pieces. So in other words, what I'm saying is even the very first movie musical, crazy though it is, and reckless and bizarre and accidental, still has these wonderful touches.
And it won many Oscars.
I think it won the Oscar for Best
Best Picture,
I don't
and
remember now.
I think she won.
But no, she was nominated.
Oh.
She didn't win. Someone else did. I think Mary Pickford won for
Oh, well, of
Coquette.
course.
Because, Hollywood royalty, we must make kowtow. But I think the answer to your question, Michael, is Love Me Tonight, 1932, Paramount. This is a movie in the Jeanette MacDonald, Maurice Chevalier, Lubitsch style, but it's directed by Ruben Mamoulian. But it's sexy and sophisticated, and it's loaded with innuendo, and it's very charming, and it's very imaginative. Historians always refer to the scene in which isn't it romantic? It's a song. If you look at the song sheet, it's verse and chorus. Oh, that's nice. But in the movie, it's this whole musical scene in which people are conversing to the music. They're not song lyrics, they're speaking lyrics, so to say. Sometimes they are speaking, sometimes they're singing, and it travels from Maurice's tailor shop into this cab. The music just keeps moving along, and it picks up people along the way, and it's traveling to Jeanette's chateau, kind of thing. And this is how we're going to meet, how boy meets girl. They haven't met yet, but the point is Maurice's song is going to travel us over the countryside. A gypsy fiddler is there, the marching soldiers and so on. The song keeps traveling from person to person. It's like Tolkien's ring.
So what
he always wants to be with the most powerful person around. And no, you're not good, Gollum. I need this guy. Don't throw me in the volcano. So the music keeps moving along until it gets to the chateau, and there's Jeanette, and she finishes the song for us. Incredibly imaginative, like the greatest 7 minutes in the history of the movie music.
What year was that again?
1932. And the next great musical is Gigi, which is like 67
I was just going to say, I was flying back from Buenos Aires, and I was watching the movies that they have there on the plane, and I hadn't seen Gigi in years.
Gigi.
And I put it on, and I was completely entranced by it.
It is
That is a
amazing.
perfect movie.
It is.
It's a beautiful movie, and conceived as a movie musical, right? Not stage first.
No, absolutely. And in fact, it's based on, of course, the credits don't say this because it's always contractual. It's based on a little-known French movie that was based on the Colette short story.
Yeah.
The short story is like this long, and all the stuff you know from Gigi is not in the story. It's in that French movie that was made in something like 1949. So in other words, MGM bought the movie from, Pathé or whoever it was, and handed it to Lerner, so to say. And Lerner used everything in that movie. It's never mentioned. No one seems to know that that's what Gigi is based on.
What was the movie called?
It's Gigi.
It's called the original.
Absolutely. And there's a wonderful moment in this, now that we're going to the Gigi movie. Vissa Minnelli is directing, and Minnelli loves these moments where visually everything seems to come together for a moment. And he's decided that at a certain moment, and I think it's one of the songs now, I forget now, the swans have to kind of do this. They're floating around in this little pond.
Yeah.
So in order to be sure that that happens, he has penned the swans in. You can't quite see it, but there's this sort of little fencing. And there are like 6 swans there. And they're filming away. And you can see the swans keep going up to the fence and think, what? Who put this fence here? Because normally they're all over the pond. You almost can hear them saying, take away the fence, we're swans, kind of thing. Other than that, though, which is a wonderful moment to look for, that is the most, you can tell even from the credits, those wonderful drawings they have.
Yeah.
That truly is a fine movie.
They filmed it in Paris, too, and often they would make these movies, though, in the back lot. I wonder why they decided to go on location.
Because, well, first of all, he wanted to film the Maxime scene in
Maxime's, yeah.
He had to make a special arrangement, and that meant I think they had only 2 nights, and they had to move very, very, but the atmosphere is incredible. The Maxime sequence is fabulous. I mean, the first one, when they're established, there's a young guy, a page, who has a cane, and he takes your top hat with the cane, and you see the orchestra in this little built-in thing in the back. A lot of people miss that. That's actually what Maxime's looked like.
And so you refer to it as perhaps the greatest movie musical of all time.
It is. That and Love Me Tonight, I guess, are up there. But Gigi has more because it's got much more power in the score. That really is a tremendous score.
What about bombs? What are some of the worst movie musicals?
Well, there's a great long list, and they tend to be so obscure that
Yes, you haven't
if
seen
you
them.
stay up late and tune into TCM, you'll immediately encounter one, like about 3 a.m. If they're not running a Bonita Granville festival, they'll be doing.
But how about like the
worst.
chorus line? That was considered a big fiasco.
But so yes, it was, and it is a fiasco because the director did not see. What happened was they wanted to make a movie of Oh What a Lovely War. This was 1960s, and every musical has to be filmed. Every stage musical has to be made
turned
into
a movie.
But that was such a theatrical. It was an English musical, and so theatrical, there was no way to do it. Attenborough came up with a way to do it, a terrible way, but the movie succeeded.
Right.
Kind of thing. So they thought, Attenborough can film unfilmable
I
stage
see.
musicals. So they gave him a chorus line.
I was working in the casting office for that movie, but it was highly. I was the girl who answered the phone. I was too low on the totem pole to know about the secret list of who was in it.
Yes.
But when they came out with this cast, you sort of, no disrespect, any of you sort of went, what? I mean,
It was a little confusing.
Michael Douglas
Is
played
there anyone less
director.
like a Michael Bennett type,
And Michael
director,
Douglas.
choreographer than Michael Douglas?
But they're casting Hollywood stars. They're not casting theater people.
But there are probably
No, but there
Hollywood
were
stars that
nobodies.
seem more like Michael Bennett, and then maybe you should have put Michael Bennett himself into that. I always feel Michael Bennett should simply have been given 4 cameras, as he was by the Tony Awards the year that Chorus Line won, and simply filmed the show.
Yes.
And then we would have had a wonderful.
but where you and I disagree, Ethan, at one point is Gypsy. To me, Gypsy was so flawed because they didn't have Ethel Merman, whereas you don't take issue with that.
No, and Ethel had been promised the role, but they were never going to use Ethel Merman. Ethel, if you look at Call Me Madam, for instance, and and no, not the earlier movies. Let's forget it. But Call Me Madam, 1950. You can tell I mean, Ethel Merman was one of the greatest stars the musical's ever produced. But there's a way she has of presenting herself that doesn't work for film if you're
Too
going to
big.
be acting.
Yeah.
And you know, Madame Rose is an acting part. It isn't just a singing triumph. And I saw the original Gypsy. Merman was not only really marvelous in it, but she got every laugh. Only Angela Lansbury has gotten as many laughs in that role, and I've seen all the Broadway Gypsies kind of thing. So I don't think they could ever possibly have hired. And
It's
after all, and Rosalind Russell was famous for playing other actresses'
But she
stage
couldn't
roles.
sing it.
Well, Lisa Kirk could. The point
Yes.
is they always dub.
They always dub.
I'll tell you something. In fact, when Merman died, and the estate was going over her stuff and cataloging
Yes.
it, you know, as they have to. Do you know what they found in her knickknacks closet?
No.
The original sound discs of Rosalind Russell singing the score to Gypsy. Because, you know, Russell did pre-record it.
Yeah.
And even years later, if someone dared bring up the fact that she was dubbed by Lisa Kirk, Russell would say, I wasn't dubbed. I said, because she never
That's very
probably
funny.
saw the movie. You know, she's on to her next job kind of thing. And she knows that she pre-recorded it. And actually, if you listen carefully, every now and then at the start of a song, it is Russell. And then suddenly this wonderful,
I know.
creamy
It's,
Lisa
well,
Kirk
that's the
voice
thing.
comes.
Now, I'm going to ask you, there was a problem, going back to the earlier musicals, you point out that Hollywood wanted the sophistication of Broadway, but at the same time, they were dealing with audiences across the nation, including what we now call the red states, and they were antagonistic towards it at the same time that they wanted that sophistication.
This is my theory of the
Yeah.
three audiences.
Yeah.
The first audience is the sophisticated one. It's on the coasts. Radio City Music Hall, the old theater capitals, Boston, Seattle, LA, San Francisco, obviously New York, and to a certain extent, Philadelphia.
Chicago?
Kind of thing. Yes, absolutely Chicago. That was the second city for theater. Chicago at one point had 40 theaters.
Yeah.
I mean, regular, play theaters kind of thing. But the second audience is like smaller cities, the Midwest, less sophisticated by far, but somewhat adventurous. A little bit of adventure is okay, not a lot of adventure. Then you have the third audience, which is the South and small towns. They don't want adventure. They like their art well broken in. They like things that they're already used to, and they just get more of it.
And also that they didn't want blacks, and so they had to have
Well, that was, yes,
separate
there was the
musical-
racial
yes,
thing too,
that
but I
was-
mean,
yeah.
even quite aside from that,
Yeah.
in terms of just the art, the third audience was very standoffish unless it was lappy, basically, and also simple and basic. So the point is, you can't have a really big hit unless you grab two of the audiences. You can get the first and the second, you can get the second and third, you can't get the first and third because that would
together.
never happen, kind of thing. Top Hat, for instance, huge hit. It seemed to sweep the audiences. I don't know why, because they were somewhat sophisticated, those Astaire Rogers.
Yeah.
I'm sure the third audience didn't catch all the jokes, kind of thing. And I have young friends that I do video night with, and I showed them Whoopi, which is 1930.
Yeah.
It's basically a filming of a Ziegfeld hit.
Eddie
They
Cantor.
cut it down and they left out some of the people who just showed up and sang, without having. They keep it to the story, but it's the original cast. Kind of thing, and sort of new score, and Busby Berkeley doing choreography. He wasn't with the show originally, and these guys didn't get any of the jokes at all. Eddie Cantor was they had a good time. They really enjoyed it, and they were busy picking out the chorus boy they liked from this number. Oh, look, there he is, like in the back row, that kind of thing.
But
but in terms of understanding why this kind of material was so immense in its day.
Well, that's
it
very
went right, but
dated
of course, they didn't
material.
even
Yeah.
Grand Hotel went right by them. To tell you.
You know what I saw not too long ago? 42nd Street, and I was surprised at how gritty it was. I mean,
Yes.
it really digs down deep into the Depression.
Yes, it does.
And these people are really desperate, and you get a sense that if this show doesn't work, this guy is going to be wiped
Don't you
out.
remember when he
Wiped
takes
out.
Ruby Keeler into his arms before she goes out to take over for the Star?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. He says, what is it? 100 jobs, 100 people.
Yeah.
He says basically, it's up to you. This is where he says, you're going out there a youngster, but you've got to come back a star. And she just is limp. Good old Ruby Keeler. The camera isn't on me, so why should I act?
Right.
Not that you can anyway. But the point is, yes, it is. It's very much a depression. And you notice, by the way, that the musical numbers are all bunched up, except for one early rehearsal of You're Getting to Be a Habit with Me. They all come at the end because musicals had been so unpopular that Darryl Zanuck, who was in charge of this at Warner Brothers, decided, just in case musicals aren't coming back yet, we can cut all the numbers out and we still have, see, that's another difference between the Broadway and the Hollywood musical. You take the songs out of a Broadway musical and the story is incoherent.
Right.
Because, but you can take the songs out of most Hollywood musicals, not Gigi, but most of the ordinary ones, and everything is still intact.
Well, look what Bob Fosse did with Cabaret.
Yes, now that's an interesting case of a filming that is very different from the original, but is good. Normally, I think if they start
But they made the decision in Cabaret that all the songs were going to be done in the Cabaret.
Well, not just in the Cabaret, but they all had to be things that people really would be singing. For instance, at one point you hear Married on a Victrola.
Yeah.
That's okay. And of course, remember they sing Tomorrow Belongs to Me and it's outdoors at a whatever it is. But in other words, you couldn't have boy and girl in a meadow singing I Love You in that.
But they cut a lot, and also, Fosse didn't want Joel Grey. He didn't want him.
I didn't know that. Is that true?
Joel Grey told us that.
Yeah. Fosse didn't want him. He had to fight
Really?
for his own
That
part.
is odd.
Yeah.
Since Joel Grey is so, attached
Identified
to
with
that.
the part, yeah.
I always.
He wanted Alan Cumming. No, kidding.
No, he wanted Bob Fosse, is what.
Yes. Fosse never gave up wanting to get back on stage or, on film. He always was an entertainer.
Yeah. All right, we got to wrap it up. When Broadway Went to Hollywood, a new book by Ethan Mordden. You've given us. I want to run to my Netflix account now and look
We
up
have all these movies to watch.
And I still think, because I saw it as a kid, I know everyone says it's a terrible movie. I thought it was enchanting. I think Lucille Ball in Maine was. I kind of like that.
I know people who love it.
I like.
I know people
I
who
have a
love
soft spot in my heart for Lucille Ball and B. Arthur and Maine.
That is one
Sorry,
of the
Angela Lansbury. I love you. You should
that
have
moment
had it, but
in the title song when all the guys all go down on one knee as she moves to. She looks so gallant and wonderful to me.
Well, true, but it took a lot of bad Lucille Ball performance to get to that. It took a lot of bad.
But Angela Lansbury always says that the day she knew that she wasn't going to get the film was when she saw Lucille Ball backstage.
Hanging around backstage.
That's it. The book is When Broadway Went to Hollywood by Ethan Mordden. Thanks a lot for being our guest here on Theater Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the CORY and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy STRELSIN Foundation, and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you